introduce myself and the co-presenter momentarily. I also want to note that Zoom has updated to Zoom Workplace, and possibly some of you might have had difficulty joining the meeting, so we will try to bring you up to speed as you may join. Before we begin presenting the content, though, I want to first cover a few logistics that fortunately have not changed. If you participated in prior CPF webinars, you probably know this detail. All participants will be muted during the webinar, so you will all be participating in listen mode. The PowerPoint presentation either has been or will be available to participants. The slide deck will also be on the HUD Exchange soon after this webinar if it's not already there. You will find the slides on the recently launched CPF cohort landing page depicted here. Although you will be participating in listen mode, we still want you to be actively engaged. You may submit content-related questions using the chat feature of Zoom, sending those questions to everyone. The co-presenter and I will monitor the chat and answer clarifying questions when possible as they are asked during the presentations. We will also pause at the end of each section of today's webinar, read aloud those questions asked frequently, and orally answer them for all to hear. As in the prior webinars, we have reserved time for a Q&A period toward the end of the presentation, where we'll invite a HUD representative to answer the more difficult questions or clarify where we presenters provided an earlier response that may be modified as necessary. Here's the agenda that we will follow today. As I mentioned, it will begin with introductions, followed by a brief review of the prior cohort webinars, and then we'll begin our presentation on the forms and submission topic. After we cover those agenda items, we'll have the final question and answer period and identify resources available in the HUD Exchange to further guide your preparation of the forms and submission process. Lastly, we'll invite you to complete an evaluation either before you end participation in this webinar or afterwards. Now I'll begin by introducing myself and then tag my co-presenter, who will introduce herself and in turn tag to a HUD representative who has joined us today as well. Again, my name's Randall Mullen, and I'm with TDA Consulting, where I've worked for many years as both vice president and as a senior consultant on a wide range of housing and community development projects. I've recently assisted HUD in explaining guidance around special congressional appropriations. That work has included both recovery from natural disasters and response to the COVID-19 pandemic, plus recovery from its associated impacts, and now the CPF program. The co-presenter today is Jennifer Alpha. Jennifer, will you please introduce yourself? And you might have to come off mute, Jennifer.
Yeah, sorry about that. Hi, my name is Jennifer Alpha. I'm a senior consultant with TDA Consulting. I've been with TDA about 12 years and working in the housing and community development field for over 25. I work on a range of programs similar to Randall. I also assisted in delivering the budget cohort for the cohort series. So happy to be back and to see you all here. And I'll turn it over to Connor.
Hey everyone, my name is Connor LaRoe. I'm a program analyst with the Congressional Grants Division, working as a systems officer to help support some of the grant officers that you're currently working with. And I'm also working with our technical assistance providers like TDA to continue to develop technical assistance resources for the CPF program like the cohorts that you're currently on now. and I will turn it back over to TDA.
All right, thank you, Connor. The CPF cohort assembled today is created to enable you to gain specific guidance that will assist with the satisfactory completion of all the grant materials necessary for your award. You were invited to join this cohort based on an award of FY23 CPF grant funding. To facilitate and support this cohort, you are enrolled in a learning management system called Absorb, which is hosted by TDA Consulting. Previous webinars on the dates detailed here offered guidance on the requirements for submission of your grant materials related to project narrative, which entails describing a full project scope. Budget, how to itemize not only planned uses of your grant, but also identify sources of funding for the entire project. And environmental review, when and how to assess the impacts of your project on the surrounding environment and vice versa. Today's session 4 on forms and submissions will specifically assist you with the completion and submission of the required forms and related content necessary to enter into a grant agreement and get started on your community's project. To obtain valuable resources and the prior webinar slides that Jennifer referenced, you do want to check out the CPF landing page. And if you haven't, sign up on the HUD Exchange listserv to obtain updates. Should you have already done so, be sure to add the CPF program to your notifications. That way you'll be notified about information that is posted in the HUD Exchange. And I'm going to drop into the chat right now a screenshot of the listserv page where you would enroll. I believe this shows the address and at the header, and also helps you to realize that the CPF program is actually listed alphabetically under its parent program, which is the Economic Development Initiative. So you'll scroll down to the E's, and then you'll find community project funding grants there. So what specifically will the forms and submission topic cover, and how will Jennifer and I address it? Well, once again, we will explain guidance based on the FY23 grant guide, just like we did for grant materials on narrative, budget, environmental review, and so forth. See on this screenshot, version 1 of the guide, which we have referenced earlier. The required forms and information for submission of your grant packet are described in the attachments to this grant guide. Jennifer and I will detail in this presentation key forms and instructions, beginning with the standard 424 application for federal assistance, other required forms, and grantee submission checklists. Since Jennifer and I delivered previous cohort webinars to you, HUD has changed the submission process for many grantees. Some of you will submit content via email, as earlier indicated. Many of you, however, will now submit content within DRGR. Those grantees affected by this change have been notified by HUD. The FY23 grant guide has also been updated to address this change, and that version of the grant or guide has been published on the HUD Exchange as version 2.0. You will note the different version number shown on this screenshot. Accordingly, I will provide you with an overview of the two submission processes, and then Jennifer and I will cover each of them in other parts of the presentation. The updated version of the FY23 grant guide does not change instructions for grantees who fit the following description. Those grantees who submitted grant materials to HUD before April 15, 2024, but have not yet obtained a fully executed grant agreement. If you submitted a single grant material, such as a project narrative or a budget, or any other particular form to HUD for review before April 15th, then you will continue to submit your grant package's content by email. Or if you've submitted all the grant materials, but you have not yet obtained a fully executed grant agreement, HUD will execute your grant agreement after having approved the full grant package submitted by email. On the other hand, the updated FY23 CPF grant guide does change instructions for grantees who did not submit any grant material to HUD before April 15, 2024. If you haven't recently begun submitting grant materials, you will submit your grant packages materials within DRGR, not by email. And HUD will execute a grant agreement after having reviewed and approved your complete submission via the new process. As indicated here, this is an important change for most grantees, and it means going forward, those grantees will benefit from a new improved submission process that utilizes a customized module within the same system that will permit your use of CPF grant funds. For many of you, therefore, this may be considered welcome news. Given the change in instructions to grantees, Jennifer and I, we want to determine how it affects grantees who are attending today's webinar. We're interested in learning how you will submit your grant package by email or by DRGR. So we want to poll grantees for an answer to that question. And I'll now turn it over to Jennifer to facilitate the poll that is now appearing on your screen. You are essentially going to be asked 3 questions, or a single question. How will you submit your grant package? The first choice is by email to HUD. The second choice is within DRGR to HUD. And the third choice may apply to many of you. I don't know for sure. So please indicate your response, and Jennifer will facilitate the poll from here on.
Yeah. Thank you all. It looks like we've got about almost everybody's participated so far. So we'll give just a couple more seconds for the last few of you to join in if you're interested. And okay, I think we can go ahead and end that poll. And we'll share the results. So it looks like the majority of folks are actually going to be submitting their materials through DRGR. So that's an exciting development. So again, this applies to anybody who had not yet submitted prior to the announcement that folks would need to switch to DRGR. If you started the submission process before that date, you would continue with that process. And there's only a couple of you who are going to be doing it by email. The majority of you will be doing it in DRGR, and there are a few of you who aren't sure. So if you have any specific questions about which category you fall into, feel free to drop a note into the chat directly to me or Randall or Connor, and we can help you figure out which category you fall into.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. And I might add that you can also probably find out from your grant officer. But yeah, it looks like 81% of you will use the new process, and no more than roughly 19% will follow the old process. Thank you for facilitating the poll, Jennifer. And we will continue now with the first part of this presentation, which concerns the key forms and instructions, beginning with the SF-424 application for assistance. And I want to make a few points before I actually begin sharing the following slides with you. As I mentioned, the key form begin with this one, the standard form 424, or application for federal assistance. Those of you who represent grantees that receive other funding are familiar with this standard form. Others are encountering it for the first time. Despite the change in the submission process, this form is still required. However, and this kind of illustrates the way that there will be a fork in the road, some of you will fill out the form and email it to HUD, just like we have described previously. That's the smaller of the group of attendees today. Most of you will enter the same information within DRGR, which will then generate the form for you. So let's keep that in mind as we move through the following set of slides. The SF-424, as I mentioned, is the application form for all organizations, including both sets of grantees, to receive federal funding from either HUD or other departments. It provides basic information on your organization as a grantee, which requests those funds made available by a special appropriation of Congress. As such, your organization is viewed as an applicant, and you must carefully identify and describe the organization along with the planned community project and its funding source. If you represent a grantee which will submit the grant materials by email, which is a minority of you in this cohort, how can you obtain the SF-424 application form? Well, first, you would refer to the FY23 grant guide and turn to the page depicted here, which is page 11. And you would use a link you're directed to, which refers to section 5. That link in the guide, section 5, will take your computer to the related HUD webpage. And from there, you will follow the steps to find the SF-424 at the grants.gov landing page. And there you will select forms and then SF-424. But I do want to emphasize that you will find that particular form identified in the family type of grant benefits. And that sometimes is confusing, but it's referring to the type of federal grant that benefits more than individuals. And your organization, of course, is more than a single individual. And then you'll also, then the third step after finding forms in SF-424, you want the application for federal assistance. That is the base form that you would submit. And you'll find out momentarily that there are a couple of supplemental forms that carry that same SF-424 designation. If you represent a grantee, again, which will submit its grant materials within DRGR, you'll follow a different process. You will provide the same information, but the SF-424 form will be generated by DRGR. As I mentioned, you won't have to download the form. And then after you complete the fields associated with that form in the grant processing module, it will be completed and ready for signature. Now let's take a look at what all grantees must do to complete the necessary information for the SF-424 form. Again, that information is common regardless of the process. On the left side of the slide, you see the standard form as it will appear for those who download the form and submit grant materials by email. Once your computer has downloaded the SF-424 application for federal assistance, you can complete it as a fillable form within Adobe Acrobat. The right side of this slide depicts the page in the FY23 grant guide, which provides instructions for the use of the grant processing module within DRGR and begins to prompt you to enter information that is necessary for the SF-424. To correctly follow the specific instructions, you must possess 3 essential pieces of information referenced by TDA in prior webinars. 1, the legal name of your organization. Second, the unique entity identifier, UEI, from SAMS.gov. Each grantee, therefore, must have an active registration on the SAMS.gov system. And 3, award information from the Joint Explanatory Statement, or JES, from the congressional record. As you either fill in each box on the form or enter the project's information in the related fields of the DRGR screen, you will follow instructions, these specific instructions in the center of the slide for certain boxes, but be instructed to leave blank others. The last specific instruction, box 21, you see that in the lower right-hand corner of the center column of the slide. It refers to certifications and assurances. It also requires your authorized representative to sign and date that form, thereby providing assurances attesting that the foregoing information is true, complete, and accurate. After completing the information for the SF-424 form, your authorized representative then must make those further assurances that fit the type of project or program your community will undertake with the CPF funding. Depending on the type of your community's project, you complete information for one or both of these supplemental forms, which specify certification of those additional assurances. You may obtain each of these forms where you obtain the SF-424 form for those of you who are submitting by email, but most of you can expect DRGR to generate these supplemental forms. Depending on which method of grant submission process applies, you are required to supplement the SF-424 with one or both of these additional assurances forms. As you see here, one form of the forms relates to construction programs or projects. The other form relates to non-construction programs or projects. And each form requires your representative to provide related additional assurances. You would want to check with your grant officer if necessary to determine which apply. As a general piece of guidance, Jennifer and I note that it's better to include both rather than leave out one and delay your submission process. Okay, that's it for the SF-424 application for federal assistance. And Jennifer now will go over other required forms. Jennifer?
Yeah. So these next 2 forms are the remaining 2 forms that you'll need to complete as part of your overall package. We're going to talk a little bit about some other items that can help you with your submission, but these are the remaining two forms. So it's the SFLLL, which is the disclosure of lobbying activities form, and then also the SF 1199A, that's your direct deposit sign up form. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so for the SFLLL, the disclosure of lobbying activities, first we want to give you just a little bit of background on the HUD guidance that goes along with this form. So this form is basically a disclosure of any type of lobbying activity. And what that means is that no appropriated federal funds may be paid by or on behalf of the applicant to any person for influencing or attempting to influence an officer or employee of any agency, a member of Congress, or an employee of a member of Congress in connection with your application. This also includes any award of funds resulting from the submission of the application for federal assistance or its extension, renewal, or amendment or modification. So basically, no lobbying related to this application. There are two ways that this can be submitted depending on how you're doing your submission. So either by email or through DRGR. So we'll talk about the email submission process first. You see on the screen here a screenshot of the SFLLL form that can be filled out in Adobe. So if your organization has paid or will pay funds other than federally appropriated funds to influence or attempt to influence the persons that are listed on that prior slide, then you must complete and submit the disclosure of lobbying activities form as part of your package, and you need to complete all fields that are relevant. If you are not using funds for lobbying, then you're going to submit this form, but you're going to note that it's not applicable in part 10 of the form. So in either case, whether you're doing lobbying or you're not, you're still submitting this form. How much you complete of the form depends on the answer to the question of whether that lobbying disclosure applies to you. So even if you are not doing lobbying, again, you're still going to submit this. You're just going to note NA in part 10. If you check I agree in box 21 of the SF 424 and you sign it, then you're not required to submit any separate certification regarding lobbying. Okay, so this is again for email submitters. You can take a look at the CPF grant guide, page 13. It goes on to page 14 as well. And you'll see here on this page the guidance relating to this form and then some instructions regarding the form itself. So take a look at that grant guide if you have any additional questions. If you do need to download the form because you're doing the email submission, you're going to go to gsa.gov and you're going to download the form in your Adobe Reader from gsa.gov. And there is a link to that in the grant guide. You can also complete the form in Adobe and have it signed separately. So moving on then to the DRGR submission. So in DRGR, you're going to be in the grant processing module when you set up all of the materials that you're required to submit. And for the SFLLL form, you're going to see on the Documents tab in the Grant Processing module a list of documents, and it includes all these different forms, including the SFLLL. And you're going to click to open that form, and then you're going to provide the name and address of the reporting entity in the field for lobbying registrant contact. If not, you're going to enter not applicable in the required fields. So you're going to, just fill out that form as you see it pop up in DRGR after you click to open it from that Documents tab that you see there on the screen. Okay, so that's the SFLLL, pretty straightforward. We're going to move on to the SF 1199A. This is the direct deposit sign-up form. So this is where how you're going to receive funds into your account as you draw them down from DRGR when you get to that point. So pretty important form. All grantees have to sign up because this is how you're going to be able to access your funds through DRGR by doing this direct deposit. You're going to be working on this form, but you're also going to be enlisting your bank or financial institution to help you out with a part of this process as well. So we'll describe that in a moment. This screenshot here shows you what the direct deposit sign-up form looks like. Okay, so you want to refer to the grant guide on page 14 for information about the SF 1199A. There is a link to the actual form there on the page. And you're going to follow the instructions here for completing the various sections of the form. So the grantee's name, address, telephone number, your CPF grant number, the EIN, the type of accounts, all the information that you see here is going to need to be completed by you. All right, and then so section 1 of the form is completed and signed by your authorized representative. And then section 3 of this form is actually going to be signed and dated by your financial institution. So they're verifying basically that the information on that form is accurate. So you can complete that form using Adobe Acrobat on your computer. Again, check the grant guide for any of the specifics on the information that you're going to need to complete the form. And just a note that with respect to your financial institution, either a signed letter from the bank or a signed form must be included as with using a wet signature. So they actually have to sign the document. Can't be, electronic or a copy or anything like that. You need a wet signature from the bank on either the letter that you're using to verify your account or the form. And include a voided check or a deposit slip with this form when you submit it. And if you don't have it, that letter from the bank can work in place of a voided check or a deposit slip. All right, so if you're doing email, you're going to take that form that you've completed with the signature from your bank, along with a voided check or a letter from your bank confirming your account information, and you're going to submit it to HUD via email, along with all your other materials, obviously. Now, if you're doing the DRGR submission, you're going to do the same process with the form. However, the form is then, and the voided check or that letter from your bank in lieu of the voided check is going to be uploaded into DRGR. So you're still using the forms. So even for those of you doing the DRGR submission, this is that one place where you'll actually need to download the forms and still do the form process that the email submitters do. But instead of emailing it, you're going to upload it into DRGR to be included with your submission review through the DRGR system. Okay.
Jennifer, before we go on to the grantee submission checklist, we have covered a lot of material, including the change in submission process. And I thought maybe it would be useful for us to pause and give the participants a chance to enter any questions in the chat. We also have one that is probably worth bringing up to all, and Connor has answered the question about access to DRGR. I'll read that answer aloud. And I want to, of course, point out that both you and I, Jennifer, have emphasized that the use of the funds would require access to DRGR. And what we have stated in the prior webinars is that when your grant agreement is executed and you then have access to the grant funds, you are notified by HUD, and if you don't have an account, you set up that account. This change is in process, and as such, Connor has offered guidance that is presently provided by HUD, and he states that if you are an FY23 grantee that has submitted some materials before April 15, you will receive your DRGR access once you have that fully executed grant agreement from HUD. If you, however, did not submit grant materials before April 15th or still haven't, you will use the new process that Jennifer and I have described, and the responsible HUD office is currently working on setting up all grantees in DRGR that will use what we refer to as the grant processing module. So this is one of those cases where, you know, we're going through a transition, and you're asked to stay tuned for further notification by email from HUD about the DRGR process. And maybe we should just pause and see if there are any follow-up questions in regard to that matter, because I know, you know, if I were a grantee, I would be eager to get started on completing the materials. But what we want to emphasize as a takeaway from what we've each covered to date in this, or up to the minute in this presentation, is you are essentially gathering and providing the same information either way you submit. And so you can continue to provide and write out that information. In the one instance Jennifer just made, download the deposit form and have everything ready to go when you might receive that DRGR portal access. Is there anything you would like to add, Jennifer, with your added insight into DRGR?
No, I think that you covered
Okay.
that well.
All right.
I didn't see any other questions in the chat, I don't think.
Okay, well then, to the point about completing all the necessary materials, you're going to go over the grantee submission checklists.
Yes. So again, we've now covered all the forms that are required. Just to let you know that those are the required forms. However, there are checklists that are available. These are optional to use, but they are recommended because they're going to help you ensure a more quality submission, which means a faster approval. So we're going to talk about these checklists just so that you know that they are available and how they can help you. So with these checklists, you want to ensure that all of the items on the checklist are included in your submission, and all the requirements that are listed on that checklist have been met. Some of the things on the checklist are things you actually have to create and submit, and some are things you just have to make sure you've done. Again, this is optional, but it is recommended as it will help your submission. So there's two checklists. There's one for email submissions, call this the long form, and then there's one for DRGR submissions. We'll call that the short form. So you want to refer to your grant guide. These checklists are in attachment 1. Page 68 contains the email checklist, and page 69 contains the DRGR checklist. So looking at the email checklist first, you're going to see here that you actually, if you kind of go between the two, you're going to see some common items on these checklists. So for instance, the first one, do you have an active sam.gov registration? This is included on both of the checklists. So you want to make sure that you have done that step. That's an action item step. You want to make sure that you've done that. And then you're going to go down these lists depending on whether you're doing the email or the DRGR submission. So for the email submission, many of these checklist items relate to ensuring that you put the right information on the forms. One of the advantages of DRGR is now that DRGR will pull information that's already in DRGR into the form sections of those forms that are now populated in DRGR. So the system is doing some of the work for us. So we don't have to double check that because it is already there. You can double check if you like. It's never a bad idea just to confirm information that's in DRGR, but the system is doing some of the work for us. But because on the email submissions, you're actually filling out these forms and entering names and dollar amounts, you just want to go through and double check all of that information. So many of the items on this email submission checklist relate to you going back to those forms, confirming the legal names are correct on the forms, making sure that the amounts requested are correct, and just ensuring that those forms have been completed properly and that they've been signed and dated properly. So that's, probably takes you down to about a third, about 2/3 of the way down that email checklist is just ensuring that your forms have been completed properly. You want to make sure that your project narrative describes the entire project and indicates the specific activities that will be financed with the CPF grant. This is true for the DRGR submission as well. So you'll see that same checklist item on the other side. Your indirect cost rate, you want to make sure that you've considered your indirect cost rate and whether you're using the de minimis amount or the federally negotiated indirect cost rate if you have an agreement. That appears on the DRGR checklist as well. So you can see that the DRGR checklist is a good bit shorter just because the system is doing a lot of the work for us already, which is why we're so excited about this switch over to DRGR. So both of these checklists are available in the grant guide if you want to go back and take a look at them just to make sure that you've met some of those frequently forgotten items or ways that people have encountered getting a rejected package so that you can avoid those with your submission. And go to the next slide. All right. So just to recap, this is not a fillable form. It will guide your submission, however, and certainly you can download it, print it, use it however you like to make sure that you've met those requirements. Again, some of the items are action items rather than items to be submitted. In other words, are things that you need to submit and just need to ensure that you've got them accurate before you do your submission. You want to refer also in your quality checks to the previous cohort sessions on the narrative and the budget to address any items such as consistency with the JES, the budget format, and the indirect costs that I mentioned. Those cohort sessions go over those items in a lot more detail. So if you want to do a final quality check of your submission, it's not a bad idea to pull those slides, just page through them quickly, make sure you've covered all the bases so that when your grant officer is reviewing your submission, you're making sure that you're providing the best submission possible.
And Jennifer, one of those prior cohort sessions concerned the budget, and you went over the budget format. I think it's probably worth stressing. I'm going to go back to the preceding slide. Each of these two checklists does make reference to the project budget being consistent with the requirements of the applicable Appropriations Act and cost principles. You see, that's the third checklist item for the DRGR submission. And it's detailed actually a little more in the email submission checklist, all the way down where it's like the next to the last item before the indirect cost rate. It reads, the project budget details the project's overall budget and indicates the specific activities that will be financed with the CPF grant funds, and goes on to indicate that as in the short form, there must be consistency and conformity to what's referred to as the uniform administrative requirements for all federal grants at 2 CFR Part 200. So it's important that you recognize how vital certain of these elements are. And with that in mind, we have actually created an activity to give you an example and illustrate that point. But before it's time for the poll, though, I thought maybe we should pause one more time. We have a follow-up question about DRGR access. And the question is, any idea when we will get the DRGR credentials? This participant writes, I've not seen any email from HUD giving the login information as stated in one of their DRGR webinars. I'm not sure which webinar is referenced. Again, the credentials will be granted to all grantees, regardless of the submission process at the time that the grant has been approved for use. And so there would be a notification, and if that participant has not yet been informed that their grant stands approved, then it's less likely that you would receive a notification from DRGR regarding access. Now, what you may be referencing here are webinars that have been held to introduce the new DRGR submission process that Jennifer and I are referencing. And I attended one of those webinars myself, and I know that the person who spoke on behalf of HUD did indicate that there would be notification, and that has not occurred yet. As Connor indicated in his answer to the earlier question, HUD is going through a transition process and is having to enter now something like 2,400 additional grantees that join your FY23 cohort, which had several hundred grantees along with those in the FY23 cohort. So they're trying to catch up and get ahead. Once you do receive that perhaps long-awaited email, you will benefit from this new process. So we just urge you to try to be patient and anticipate that you will receive notification soon. We can't give you a precise expectation of when that might occur. Your grant officer will be able to give you perhaps an update as applicable. Connor, is there anything you'd like? Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Randall. And I just wanted to add some clarification. I know that it can be kind of confusing with, what should I be doing? When should I be getting access between the two different systems, simply because we're transitioning between the two different processes. So to try to put it as simply as possible, if you are a FY23 grantee that has submitted some materials before April 15th, you're considered to be still using the old process, which is not the grant processing module. And you will receive DRGR access once you have received a fully executed grant agreement. So your DRGR access will be granted once your package is submitted and fully approved. And from there, you'll go on to do your action plan at DRGR. For everybody else, those of you who have not submitted materials before April 15th and thus who are using the new grant processing module, like I said before, we're working on getting all of you uploaded and added into the system in just a mass upload, at which point, once that's completed, you will receive your individual login credentials to access DRGR. And I wanted to acknowledge too that I believe it was on those GPM training webinars that our office indicated that you would, shortly be receiving an email with your login credentials. I did want to acknowledge that. So we're simply just running behind with setting up all of the accounts. It's not for a lack of trying. We were just running into some issues. So your accounts and setup is coming. We just don't want to give you a date in case we can't meet it. We want to make sure that any communication about your account that comes next is going to be your login credentials, so you can get in and start working with the GPM. So we do apologize for the delay. We know that you're all really eager to get access to that, and we are moving as quickly as possible to get everyone set up in DRGR and get you all access.
Thank you, Connor. That is useful clarification. Okay, going back to where we left off, it is time for a poll, and before it is launched, I want to set it up. We have identified an example that illustrates what a typical grantee would ideally do with the grantee submission checklists, either one, which Jennifer went over. First, the grantee's representatives, people like yourself, would assemble all the necessary materials referenced in the checklist, determine that they are complete, and then thoughtfully check all the boxes before submitting the grant application packet, either via email or within DRGR. Often a grantee might actually be unsure about certain items. And I want to share with you now the example, and I'm going to place this PDF file in the chat for all to access. I'm sending it now, and you should be able to open it up, but I will also share my screen with that very example. And this concerns ABC Supportive Housing Project, which is a fictional project that illustrates this point. Their project narrative is excerpted here, and they have also referred to the congressional record where there is a joint explanatory statement which identifies the intent of Congress in their award. And then they have, as I mentioned, taken the grantee submission checklist, and we're using the long form here because it is almost identical in regard to the items that are highlighted, and would apply to all grantees who are represented on this webinar. The ABC Supportive Housing Project will provide housing and services to residents with special needs. I'll make this a little bigger for those of you who might not be able to open up the file that I included in the chat. But this is a project that includes both housing and services with a target toward residents with special needs. And those residents will receive drug and alcohol rehabilitation services. The agency that is undertaking the ABC Supportive Housing Project is also renovating an apartment building as part of that project. And they are expanding its operation with support from the United Way in their community. The project is made possible in part, and these are key words here, in part by a $1 million CPF grant to ABC Housing Services Incorporated. So that's part of their project narrative, the key part that we want you to take into consideration if you were a representative of ABC Supportive Housing Project. And you've then looked, they have presumably looked at the joint explanatory statement, which is taken from the congressional record And as you remember, when I went over this topic in the project narrative, that congressional record is a very lengthy document, a record, and a table lists all of the grant awardees in FY23, several hundred, in an alphabetical fashion. And this shows you where ABC Supportive Services appears at the very top here, with their $1 million grant identified in the narrative. And the representatives from ABC Supported Housing Services has essentially assembled all the materials, and they have checked off what they know they have and therefore are ready to submit, but for the items that are highlighted. So let's take a look at those highlighted items, and then I'll scroll back up to show you the narrative. They are uncertain about whether the legal name of their funding recipient is in the SF 424 Block 8 as the same identity named in the JES or the FY23 Appropriations Act or technical corrections. And they have looked here, it says ABC Housing Services, and they want to make certain, and maybe will, it appears likely so, find that the SF 424 includes that same entity. The second uncertainty relates to those supplemental forms, which or both forms should they include. They have a housing and services project. They're selecting to check off, though, only one of those two forms, particularly the form SF 424B, which is the form for non-construction programs. They're thinking mostly about the fact that they have plans to use the $1 million grant for part of their project costs that cover housing and services. Should they also include they have already figured that they will check off and complete the D form because they are renovating that apartment building. So there's a piece of uncertainty. And then the third item relates to the project narrative, which you do have in front of you. Is it describing the entire project, identifying the specific activities that will be financed with the CPF grant? And if we scroll back up here, you can read again, ABC Supported Housing Project will provide housing and services to residents with special needs. The residents receive drug and alcohol rehabilitation services. The agency is also renovating an apartment building as part of the project and is expanding its operation with support from the United Way. The project is made possible in part by that $1 million CPF grant to ABC Housing Services. Does this project narrative describe the entire project and indicate the specific use of that $1 million? So we're now going to ask you the question, if you were a representative of ABC Housing Services, would you say, yes, we are ready to submit, or not? And at this point now, we'll go back to the slides. And as it is time for the poll, it's also time to answer the question. And either Jennifer or Pamela, you may launch the poll. You have 3 questions here. The first is, our agency correctly named as ABC Supported Housing, Inc. The second question is, the form on non-construction required for our housing services project And then the third question, you may have to scroll down, is do we describe the whole project in detail and the uses of the grant? Jennifer, how are we doing on responses?
About not quite a third of the folks who have answered the questions, so
Okay, and
a little more time.
if you haven't obtained that PDF file of the same document that I shared with you and read over that 3 or 4 lines of project narrative and see if it answers each of these questions.
Got about half of the folks now.
Okay.
At about 2/3.
It looks like we might be stuck at that point too.
I think so too. Give everybody just a couple more seconds to.
Okay, and again, if you are uncertain, you can look at that PDF file and try to make a more informed decision as you pretend you're a representative of ABC Supported Housing, Inc. Okay, well, we should probably end the poll as we have only 2/3 of the participants hazarding an answer.
Okay.
And what are the results?
So it looks like for question 1, is our agency correctly named on all legal documents? That being the grant materials and the congressional record JES. 73% said yes and 27% said no.
Okay, and number 2?
For question 2, is that form, the SF424B, required for our housing/service project? About 82% said yes and 18% said no.
Okay, so those 2 questions we have clear majority answering one way. And what
Yep.
about the third question?
The third question, do we describe the whole project in detail and the uses of the grant? And this one was a little more split, half and half. We had about 12 people saying yes and 10 people saying no.
Okay, well, let's see what the correct answers are in regard to should for ABC Housing Services submit. And here are the result or the answers, and we can stop sharing the poll, and I will go over what you were contemplating in regard to that first question that Jennifer raised about is the agency correctly named on all the legal documents. It appeared that the references were consistently to ABC Housing Services for the supportive housing project. So the correct answer there is, in fact, yes, as shown over here in the right-hand column. The second question is the form related to services that is non-construction, which would include services required for this housing service project? And the answer is probably yes, since the project entails both housing and services. But part of the trouble is you can't completely tell from that project narrative. And that goes to the third question, where you might ask yourself, well, does ABC Housing Services describe the whole project and the uses of the grant. What this check mark requires is that the project narrative describes the entire project and indicates the specific activities that will be financed with the CPF grant funds. The answer there is no. Going back one more time to the PDF file. I will scroll down here so you all can see what I'm referencing and enlarge the paragraph. The project is made possible in part by a $1 million CPF grant to ABC Housing Services. But this does not say whether that $1 million will be used for housing, for services, for operation, or something else. It's necessary, as indicated in this box, to identify the entire project, which actually is fairly well described, but then indicate the specific activities that will be financed with the CPF funds. If the funds were going to be used solely for the construction of the renovation of the apartments, that's one thing. If the $1 million would be used for only the services, that's another thing. If it's both, there would be other dimensions to that project. And when you consider the fact that much rests on that project description and it being presented in its entirety, such things as the environmental review, others about how the project would be set up in DRGR once approved and the grant agreement executed, and the grant agreement itself, which is binding the nonprofit to HUD for the appropriated funds. All of that must be an agreement. But most importantly, and I want to stress this particular point, the grantee would need to be ready to submit only after describing that entire project in a clear fashion that aligns with the specific uses of the grant. That's both the budget showing sources and uses for the grant, as well as all aspects of the project. Why? Because this grant award must be used in conjunction with and in alignment with the intent of Congress. So it's vitally important that you be specific about the description of your project and identify the specific uses of the grant so that those are written into the agreement and HUD can then carry out the intent of Congress through your particular grant award. Okay, I'll stop sharing that particular item and we'll go back to the slides and the question and answer period can begin. Jennifer, do we have any additional questions and answers?
Nothing more than we had talked about before, and most of those questions relating to DRGR access, I believe all of them have been responded to as well, but nothing new.
Okay. Well, do you want to go over what's next up?
Yeah. So this is the final session of the cohort series. We've covered narrative, budget, and environmental in previous sessions, which you can review in the slides and in the recordings that are being posted to the HUD Exchange. With the conclusion of this session, all we have left is an office hours session on forms. And during that office hours, you can come with your specific questions on your forms, that's an opportunity to have more of a dialogue around your questions. You can come off of mute and we can help you through any challenges you might have. Hopefully this webinar has enabled you to get a better understanding of what's being expected. So now you can take a little time on your own to work through those steps, those materials, and come to office hours with any concerns that you might have. And the final office hours session for this cohort is on May 28th. It's going to be from 2 to 3:30 Eastern time. And again, this is your chance to have a more interactive dialogue around any questions that you might have specifically about your materials. We have our email addresses here. If you do have any questions following this presentation, you can definitely reach out to us directly. You can always also respond to the emails from the cohort's email box, and they will get routed to the right person. And as always, you can contact your grant officer with any questions you might have on the CPF program generally, or on your specific grant. And if you need the contact for your grant officer, there is a link here to HUD.gov that includes all of the grant officer assignments. Other resources that may be helpful to you, which hopefully by now you've taken an opportunity to check out, as we shared this resources slide on all of the cohort sessions. But just a reminder that the CPF program website on the HUD Exchange is extremely useful, has all of the latest guidance for the program. So definitely check that out. Your grant guide is really your instruction manual for completing your grant materials. So if you are still in the process of getting your materials together, you definitely want to look at that grant guide. There is a link on the HUD Exchange to the environmental officer contacts. I know there are always a lot of questions around environmental. So if you need direct support on that, those environmental officer contacts could be helpful to you. And then following this cohort series, you may still have questions that you need to have answered, and there is an Ask a Question help desk that you can access through the HUD Exchange. The Ask a Question allows you to submit your question. It gets routed to a program expert who can answer that question in a short turnaround time. If for some reason the question is a little more involved, it can be routed to the right folks to help get that answer for you. So very, very great, very useful resource, especially following this cohort series where you won't have direct access to folks on a weekly basis. So definitely check out the AAQ. And then finally, there will be additional desk guides coming on the program on topics like DRGR and other things that can help you better understand the requirements of the program as it moves forward. And last but not least, we always ask for an evaluation. We appreciate your time in taking this evaluation after each session. It is very helpful to us. There's a QR code. You could pick up your phone right now and scan that QR code and then quickly complete the evaluation. But the cohorts mailbox will be following up with you to ask for your participation in the survey. If you complete it right now, you can just ignore that email. But if you don't get a chance to do it right now, we will follow up and ask for your feedback, which is always really valuable. So thank you for your time in doing that. All right, and that concludes everything today. No more questions popped up in the chat while we were doing this, so I think we are officially complete.
All right. Thank you all for your participation, and we'll hopefully see you next week.